On August 19, 2020, Apple became the first publicly traded US company to hit a market cap of $2 trillion. Apple was also the first company to achieve the $1 trillion mark. Today, 5 companies have a market cap of more than $1 trillion, and 4 out of those are in technology. The 5 largest tech companies, namely Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, and Facebook, popularly known as Big Tech, recorded a combined revenue of $900 billion in 2019, which is larger than the GDP of nations like Saudi Arabia and Netherlands. The biggest driver of Big Tech's growing revenue is the increasing adoption of technology across the world. Big Tech earns billions by capitalizing on their platforms and growing user databases. Through increased growth and adoption of software, cloud computing, and ad proliferation, those billions keep increasing. Despite having similarities of being in the tech sector, these companies have very different revenue streams and growth trajectories. Some, like Microsoft, have a diversified mix of applications, cloud services, products, and data accumulation, while others have a more singular focus like Facebook. Apple recorded a revenue of $260 billion in 2019, 2% lower than the 2018 figure of $265 billion. Net income for the company stood at $55.2 billion, highest among the tech giants. iPhone is still the king of Apple, accounting for 54.7% of its revenue, even though the iPhone sales have dropped by almost $25 billion over the past year. 17.8% of revenue came from services such as Apple TV, Apple Music, Apple Pay, licensing, etc. 9.9% of revenue came from Mac sales, another 8.2% came from iPad sales. Rest 9.4% revenue was from other products such as Apple Watch and AirPods. AirPods have been particularly a hit for Apple in 2019. The distinctive wireless earphones have generated an estimated $6 to $12 billion for the company. Region-wise breakdown of revenue shows that 45% earning was from Americas, followed by Europe at 23%, China at 17%, Japan at 8%, and rest of Asia Pacific contributing 7%. Amazon generated a revenue of $280 billion in 2019, 20% higher than previous year figure of $233 billion. The company recorded the highest earning among the big tech, but recorded a modest profit of just $11.6 billion, the lowest among its peers. Amazon's online store brought its 50.4% of revenue, while 19.4% came from third-party seller services. Revenue from these two segments increased by almost $30 billion in 2019. Amazon Web Services brought 12.5% of revenue, and Prime subscription service recorded another 6.9%. Both of these segments saw an increase of $15 billion in 2019. Physical stores contributed 6.1%, while the rest 5% came from ads and other smaller sources. The company recorded 69% of its sales from US, followed by Germany at 8%, Japan and UK at 6%, while 11% from the rest of the world. Alphabet recorded a revenue of $162 billion in 2019 as compared to $137 billion in 2018, which is 18% higher. The company's profit stood at $34.3 billion. A massive 70% revenue came from advertising on Google properties like Google, YouTube, Play Store, Gmail, and Maps. Advertising by Google network members contributed 13.3% of earnings. 5.5% of revenue came from Google Cloud, and rest came from other services such as Google Music. US remains its largest market, with 46% of earnings coming from the country. followed by Europe and Middle East at 31%, Asia Pacific at 17%, and rest of the world at 6%. Microsoft's revenue saw an uptick of 14%, rising from $110 billion in 2018 to $126 billion in 2019. Meanwhile, profit stood at $39.2 billion. The company's revenue came from various sources, with Microsoft Azure contributing the largest share at 25.9%, closely followed by Office at 25.2% and Windows at 16.2%. Gaming brought 9.1% of earnings, meanwhile Bing search ads brought another 6.1%. LinkedIn revenue contributed 5.4% to overall company revenue. Microsoft Surface devices and enterprise services each contributed 4.8%. The growth in cloud computing and services increased revenue in all segments for the firm. Breaking down revenue by region shows 51% of revenue came from USA and 49% from the rest of the world. Facebook saw the largest increase in revenue among all, as its revenue jumped 27% from $55.8 billion in 2018 to $70.8 billion in 2019. The company's annual profit stood at $18.5 billion. A whopping 98.5% of its revenue came from ads, and rest 1.5% came from payment and other fees which Facebook charges developers for using its payments infrastructure. Like all other big tech, US is the largest market for Facebook, bringing 45% of its revenue. Europe follows at 24% and Asia Pacific at 22%. Rest of the world contributes 9% of its revenue. Big tech earns billions by capitalizing on their platforms and growing user databases. Through increased growth and adoption of software, cloud computing, and ad proliferation, those billions should continue to increase. As the use of technology has increased in 2020 and is only forecasted to continue growing, how much more big tech will be able to earn in the future, only time will tell.